Outspeak brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
Marisol must have passed out. She did not remember how she got from Rotherman Island back to Stockholm, only that when she opened her eyes, she was in a sterile-looking room where medical professionals were shining a light in her face. "I think she's just exhausted. We all need some rest," a voice was saying to her right. "Understatement," Marisol mumbled. "I need to sleep for however long God did after he made the world." "Welcome back to the land of the living, miss," one of the emergency room workers said. Peering around, it took Marisol almost a minute to realize she was in a hospital, and that a truly bizarre scene was playing out around her. Making sense of it was difficult. Without her glasses, Marisol may well have been blind. She struggled to make sense of the colored shapes and had to listen closely to voices just to understand what was going on. Government men dressed in black suits were talking in hushed voices and fingering their two-way radios anxiously. Additionally, there were no fewer than 30 armed and armored soldiers in the emergency room. Most of them were wearing the blue and yellow flag of Sweden, but Marisol could also see a few wearing a red, white, and blue patch that was most likely the US flag. Both soldiers and government agents were questioning Hurton and Bella nearby. The two Paradox employees sounded like they wanted to shrink into the wall and be lost forever. "Where's Blake?" Marisol finally managed to say. "Mr. Robinson just came out of surgery," a doctor replied. "He has defensive knife wounds to both of his hands, but he's proven resilient. We expect him to recover in 2 to 4 months. Hurton saw that Marisol was awake. Using this as an excuse to get away from the interrogation, he crossed the emergency room to speak with her. "You were one of the last people brought into the ER, Hurton said. "I was worried about you, but the doctors said you were never in any danger. Is it true? Varian said you trapped Malum in one of your stories." "Yeah, it's true," Marisol said. "Malum was a one-dimensional villain. I offered him power, and he took the bait so hard he didn't notice the cage until he was already inside. What happened to Blake and Aaron? They were fighting when I went through the gate." "Blake is going to be fine. Physically," Hurton said, the hesitation in his voice palpable. "Aaron Bowie, the creation who jumped you, she's dead. Blake won't talk about it, but Jericho said he killed her." "Oh, Christ," Marisol breathed. Aisling and Ushka had no concept of modern, Western hospitals, so they stayed close to one another. The experience was especially frightening because no one in the building spoke their language. Both young women had sustained light to moderate injuries during the fighting, but refused to allow the doctors to examine them, mainly because they did not know what doctors are. After a tense standoff in a private area of the emergency room, 2 people came through the privacy curtain to see Aisling and Ushka. One of them was Bella, the Crusader Kings 3 developer. The other was a tall, lanky European man who wore a Paradox Interactive credential around his neck, similar to Bella's but printed in a different color with red letters stamped over the picture of his face. Bella said something in English that Aisling and Ushka did not understand, but a moment later, the tall man started to speak in Irish. "Hello, girls. My name is Lorcan Callahan. Your creators know me as Action Sport Addict on the Paradox forums. The company brought me out here to be your translator." "You can understand what they're saying?" Aisling asked. Lorcan nodded. "I can speak your language and theirs," he answered. Chipping away at the language barrier, it took Lorcan an extra 45 minutes to convince Aisling and Ushka to let the doctors treat their wounds. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marisol, Blake, and the Creations, except for Callie, were loaded onto a tour bus and driven out of Stockholm, passing through 2 police barricades on the way. Once they were free of the city, Hurton and Bella explained the situation. By some miracle, the battle between Team Malum and Team Marisol had resulted in only one fatality. Aaron Bowie, the Creation, who had initially opened the door to this whole scenario. However, dozens of Paradox employees, Swedish police, and Royal Army soldiers had been injured in the chaos. The people of Stockholm were bewildered by the sudden blizzard striking the town in late April, and the Swedish government was demanding answers. And let's not forget the rest of NATO, Hurton said. The USA is still looking into whatever the hell you did in Detroit. And now agents of the Philippine National Police are showing up in Michigan looking for Marisol. We've got some fires to put out. Is that why you took us out of Stockholm? Marisol asked, looking at the Swedish countryside out of the window. Hurton nodded. The rest of the journey passed in a kind of quiet calm. Blake sat in the back of the bus, tinkering with the smashed remains of Asimov, the Lego robot. Someone had found the little machine in the wreckage of Paradox HQ. Both of Blake's hands were bandaged, and he was making little to no headway. Sabakira curled up in a row of seats, but she was not asleep. Marisol could sense the psionic energy radiating off the lioness as she meditated. Conti, like Marisol, was fascinated by the countryside rushing past the windows. In my story, my people lost their homeworld, Conti explained. I wonder if we'll end up settling on a planet like this. That's going to be your call, Blake told Conti. In the sequel story, The Last Heroes, you become the leader of the Vanian diaspora. You're the one who's going to lead your people to a new homeworld. A flicker of inspiration appeared in Conti's eyes. Mina and Kiri had fallen asleep in each other's arms. The 2 lovers were happy to be reunited, but too exhausted to do anything but sleep. Varian, Dak, and Mocha were having a conversation with Vetu Kealoa and Toamami. Mira Mihaka, who could speak English and Partogan, was acting as an interpreter. Emily was watching this play out, but had little to say. Trig Antenna, who did not speak any human languages, stayed together, using telepathy to figure out the general feeling of the others around them. Cassandra sat near the front of the bus, having a whispered conversation with her mother, Akira. Jericho was also in the back. Someone had given her a cell phone, and she was using it to have a very intense conversation with a high-ranking member of Paradox leadership. Marisol was so busy looking around the bus that it took her a moment to realize Aisling, Ushka, and Lorcan had appeared in the row in front, trying to get her attention. Aisling wants to know what's going to happen now that Malum is defeated, Lorcan said. I don't know, Marisol admitted. I want to go home, Aisling said through Lorcan. I know, Marisol said. Finally, after a less than pleasant 8-hour journey, the Paradox chartered bus pulled into a coastal city in southern Sweden. The Creations and Creators found themselves standing on the edge of a public garden, standing across the street from a 4-story office building, painted with a simple white facade. Callie Takara and several members of her Go team were waiting outside the entrance. Dak and Mocha were slightly alarmed at the grim expression on Callie's face. Welcome to the former office of Paradox Thalassic, Callie said. We got damn lucky the company hasn't sold the building yet. Everyone inside. We've got rooms set up here, and there's food on the way. Take the rest of the night to get your strength back. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Marisol followed Callie into the suite of offices that had been hastily converted into living spaces. Someone had dragged a box spring and mattress into the middle of each room. Better than nothing, Marisol told herself as she grabbed one of the heavy blankets off the table. Marisol stopped just long enough to take her smartphone out of her pocket. It was now completely destroyed. She dropped it on the table along with 2 halves of her broken glasses. Then she collapsed onto the bed, and passed out. Marisol woke some unknown hours later, feeling far warmer than should be natural. Also, her bed was much more lopsided than when she'd gone to sleep. Sitting up, Marisol realized she was not alone. At some point in the middle of the night, Sebakira had come into Marisol's room and was now laying stretched out on the bed. Marisol had been cuddled up next to the lion's soft, warm underbelly. A rustle of feathers caught Marisol's attention. Conti was perched in the windowsill. "You were having nightmares," Conti said. "Both of us sensed it around the same time. Forgive the intrusion, we just wanted to help." "Thank you," Marisol said, sitting up. "Is anyone else awake?" "People are coming around," Conti said. "The Paradox employees have turned one of the conference rooms into a dining area. Jericho says she wants all of us to meet there." 2 creators, 19 creations, and 1 translator piled into the former conference room of Paradox Thalassic. Hurton, Bella, and the Paradox CEO were here as well. Aisling and Ushka gazed open-mouthed at the huge feast of breakfast foods laid out on the conference table. "It's like at the bar, all over again," Aisling gasped. "The CEO says you can dig in." Lorcan briefly managed to say the words before Aisling and Ushka were stuffing their faces with pancakes and scrambled eggs. For about 5 minutes, the sights, sounds, and smells of a happy feast filled the room. Then a low drone of conversation started. Cassandra and Callie pulled Marisol aside. Both women had their own supply of nanobots thanks to the sci-fi elements of their stories. Cassandra set about repairing Marisol's glasses, while Callie fixed her smartphone. Marisol jumped with surprise when she saw the dozens of missed call notifications, most of them from her family. Toamami and Mira Mihaka were interrogating Blake about certain details of their own stories. Mira wanted to know why she was the only protagonist in the Stormbreaker universe without a love interest. Toamami was mission-oriented, asking for details about the final battle in her own story. Jericho and the Paradox CEO spoke in hushed voices, her face unreadable. Trig and Tenna held hands, unable to understand anyone, but using telepathy to read people as best they could, so they were not totally lost. Finally, once everyone had eaten their fill, save for Sebakira, who was just starting on her 5th ham shank, the Paradox CEO stood up at the head of the table. While he spoke, Lorcan interpreted for the Irish speakers. Toamami and Mira interpreted for the Partogan speakers. And the 2 Sutherian characters, Trig and Tenna, used telepathy to follow along. "My friends, if I am permitted to call you so, the past week has been an incredible series of events, to say the least. I know we all want to take some time and celebrate our victory. But I'm afraid we must push you all towards, well, what a writer might call the resolution." "Resolution?" Varian repeated. "Like the end of the story?" "More like cleaning up of the plot," Marisol said. "Tie up the loose ends before the final chapter. Right now, that means us." Emily's voice was muffled. She peered around a comically tall stack of waffles, drizzled in blackberry jam. "We are the loose ends. We can't stay in the real world," Emily said. "We have to go home. All of us." Callie's face fell. The Paradox CEO gave her an apologetic look. "How?" Ushka asked through Lorcan. "The broken gates?" "There's only one broken gate in this world," Jericho explained. "Unfortunately, the US and Swedish militaries are having a dispute over who is going to control it and access whatever's on the other side." A chorus of voices started to speak, but Jericho raised a hand. "The gate is disabled. I made sure of that," Jericho said. "No one can use it anymore. That, unfortunately, includes us. That's why Paradox brought us here." Jericho gestured to the semi-abandoned office space. "Last year, this place was an office of Paradox Interactive. Game developers worked here, of the same type that made Stellaris and Crusader Kings. That means this place is connected to the rest of Paradox Interactive's world. Jericho gestured to the Paradox CEO, who stepped forward. Even though Paradox Thalassic is no more, the company's physical infrastructure has not been fully dismantled here yet. That's why we haven't sold the building. The CEO pointed at the floor. 2 stories below us is an entrance to the Solarium, a meta-narrative space where people who write fanfictions based on our games can gather to discuss the art of writing. Places like the Solarium and the bar are held up by a combination of sci-fi and fantasy narrative elements. They stand on the blurred boundary between fiction and reality. Jericho and Blake are confident that once you are all brought into the Solarium, you can safely use the reality perforator to return to your own stories. I've got a few members of the Stellaris dev team working the numbers right now to make sure the theory is solid. You better not have taken any of my team for this, Hurton grumbled. We spent almost 6 years on that planetary combat rework, and I won't be the guy who has to tell them about another delay. The CEO ignored Hurton. I have ordered the work crews to stop demolishing the Solarium entrance, and to undo what they've already started down there. Once that is finished, we're going to start sending you back. Akira pointed at Blake and Marisol. What about you two? We left a trail of destruction in 2 major cities. Are you going to be okay? Blake and Marisol looked at each other. Then the Paradox CEO said, For once, the truth is far stranger than any fiction. Whatever cover-up corporate chooses to run with will be easier for the public to believe than reality. Doubly so now that we're in communication with both the US and Swedish militaries about all of this. Sergeant Spaniola won't stop blowing up my phone, Blake commented. I'm going to catch an AWOL for this, but you guys are all worth it. He gestured to the creations. Aisling couldn't help but blush. We're glad you're still with us, Robinson, Dak said, punching Blake in the shoulder. You all know I'm right. Without this guy, life would be too quiet. The Paradox CEO laughed. Jericho shook her head and concluded, Is there anything you want to do before you go back? Anything you haven't told your creator? I recommend that you wrap up your business within the next few days.
And joy shall overtake us. Everything that is good and divine, truth and peace and love will shine. For every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And happy man die better than facing fearful odds. For the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods.